Greetings. My name is Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. I serve as spiritual advisor to Anthony Sanchez, an innocent man on death row in Oklahoma. I am joined by David Ballard, who is the investigator on the case. On December the 20th, 1996, Julie Buskin was abducted from her apartment complex, driven out to Lake Stanley Draper, and executed, murdered on the shore. For years, authorities had very little evidence and no suspects. Until many years later, they came to have said that they came to have acquired a random match that pointed to Anthony Sanchez. Anthony was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death based on this supposed random match. In the case, there was a real reliance on DNA evidence. There was a reliance on all of these other, bullet and a sketch and shoe print, phone numbers, all of these different things. Interestingly enough, the more that we have investigated, the more that we have engaged the evidence in this case, we feel like it points to another suspect besides Anthony Sanchez. And that suspect is Anthony's father, Glenn Sanchez. David, why is Glenn Sanchez a plausible suspect in this case?
Well, for starters, he confessed to killing Julie Buskin as late as last year, prior to committing suicide. Glenn had a history of violence towards women. When you're doing cases, one of the things you look at is propensity and prior behaviors and that the buildup. And when you don't see that with Anthony, you do see that with Glenn. Interviews that were done with ex-wives and family, that Glenn was very violent. He struggled with alcohol addiction and along with opioid addictions. He was known to become very enraged when he didn't get his way or things were not going right. Bizarre sexual behaviors towards women. And also going back to the apartment where the weapon was fired, that was Glenn who fired that weapon into the wall. And with that being said, he also, as I said, he confessed to it prior to committing suicide to his ex-girlfriend / ex-wife, I believe. And then when you look at the sketch comparison, it's almost a 100% match to Glenn. Again, I can't say always 100%, but it looks a lot more like Glenn, especially at the time. Then you have the fact that when Glenn was interviewed by law enforcement, he references Stanley Draper and going to Stanley Draper to fish. And the detective in the report states that it was right next to where they found Julie's body. Then you go back to another family member talking to me and telling me that there was another incident with a woman that was assaulted and murdered around the same time. And when this family member and his wife saw that story, they actually called it in because they said the sketch on that case for the person looked just like Glenn. And that those family members said that Glenn, they absolutely believed that Glenn was capable of it because of the fact that, one, he's not always in his right mind, two, his violence and his behaviors, but also there was another sketch. So you have a potential, that you have a person who's capable of this and that is willing to do it again or has prior. Then one of the other factors are when you get back to the DNA, obviously Glenn is Anthony's dad, so there's going to be matches, but the matches should not be as complete as they are on some of the loci. But again, we don't know when we're looking at these profiles how well built they are. We've done independent testing and that to try to find out, and Glenn is over a 50% match to Anthony. A father can be, around a 50%, but over is pretty rare, if ever. And one of the things when they do DNA reports, even to this day, when they do a finding, they'll say outside of a direct relative, the likelihood of this person being a match to a random person is Now the numbers are really up there because of the way testing is done. But back then, a random person and a suspect having close matches was even unheard of. So when you get into looking at Julie Buskin's DNA, Anthony's DNA, Glenn Sanchez's DNA, there's a lot of matching that shouldn't be there because Julie's not a relative. So there's a lot of things that point at Glenn. Also, the shoe print. Anthony was a size, I believe, 10 at the time. This was a size 9. Anthony was over 6 foot tall. Glenn was 5'9". We don't have it yet to know his exact shoe size, but he was a lot smaller, had a lot smaller foot, and was even reported that when he would travel between Midwest City to Norman, he always took the back ways around and always went to the Stanley Draper. So much so that his family, even after his death, talked about his favorite pier at Stanley Draper to go to, which is not very far from where they found Julie Buskin. And that's not even the area he went fishing. The area he talked about going fishing was off a side road and went over by a dam. So he knows the area. He's got the propensity to violence. He confessed to it. And like we said, I get it that it could be, oh yeah, that's convenient that he confessed and then commit suicide and, is a relative. I see that, but there's a lot more points that go back to Glenn Sanchez, or more likely to Glenn Sanchez, than there are even close to Anthony Sanchez.
Man, if Anthony Sanchez doesn't fit, if Glenn Sanchez is a fit, you must acquit. Free Anthony Sanchez.